never, so far you don't do it live, right? You pre-record them, then upload the videos. Is that right?
Yeah. So we do pre-record them, but the idea is that there's like quite limited amount of editing going on. They are pretty long videos. They're like usually 2 hours long, something like that. And it's kind of like to let people see behind the scenes a bit. I used to do a lot of pairing with like junior developers in my job at Shopify. And I found that pairing with people, sometimes they would pick up on things that were really not obvious, that you wouldn't want to, like, you wouldn't write about, or you wouldn't like put in a book. But they would like pick up on things, pick up on habits, or like pick up on how you can be really comfortable not knowing the answer to something as a senior developer, and you can kind of just be comfortable, like, I don't know how to do this, so let's break it down and figure it out. Like, let's go to Google and see if anyone's done this kind of thing before. And I kind of wanted to, like,
I feel like there's a Stack Overflow joke here.
Yeah. So I didn't want to hide
Being
that.
Comfortable enough to stop hiding that you're using Stack Overflow.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not done live, or so far it hasn't been done live, but it is pretty much like get on the phone with Casper or whoever I'm pairing with and like hit record and just go for it and see what happens.
Do you edit them at all?
Yeah, very, very brief like edits to the beginning and the end, basically. But other than that, no.
Right.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So I sorry, distracted by the chat. Yeah, it's the real me. And I am from England. Yeah. So tell me a bit about myself. So I am. I've kind of been thinking about doing it with this show that I run with Casper that you mentioned, Naming Things. And basically, like, on that show, we're trying to show like what it's like to kind of tackle with the kind of more meta problems of writing software, and like coming up with names can be like the hardest thing, or like trying to find the right abstraction. So
it's the old software developer joke, right? The two hardest things in software development are cache invalidation, naming things, and off by one errors.
Off by one errors. Yeah. So yeah, I kind of I got into software development kind of as a kid, I guess. I was more on the front end back then. Just enjoyed like building things, making things work on my computer since I was like an early teenager. Got my first job as a front end developer when I was like 17. And I did that for a few years and kind of accidentally got exposed to Ruby on Rails. And fell in love with Ruby. So kind of like since then, just spent the rest of that time like figuring out how to do Ruby better. Phlex with a PH. And the reason that it was named Phlex is partly it's kind of related to like a few other libraries around this kind of area have that kind of thing in their name, like the stimulus reflex, not spelt with a PH. And I kind of wanted it to be kind of in that like set of libraries of like you've got like Hotwire and stimulus and stimulus reflex. And these are all approaches to like reactive, responsive user interfaces where I don't know how to describe this very well, but like basically they're all based around this concept of sending HTML over the wire as opposed to sending JSON and trying to interpret it. So kind of pre-compiling what the view should be in advance and sending that as opposed to sending the raw data and having the browser interpret it. So, but yeah, I mean, I kind of named it because I there are very few names available on Ruby Gems, and I just spent a few hours like, what is a really short name that people can remember and also isn't taken and also sounds okay when you add component at the end of it, like Phlex component.
Right. Yeah, I guess naming increasingly becomes a challenge, right?
Yeah, this is one of the issues with naming things. It's like, it's not always naming an abstraction. Just naming a library can be really hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw someone arguing in a blog the other day that components should have nonsense names because it's so likely that they're gonna like change what they do in things over their evolution. That whatever name you pick is gonna end up being like not a proper description in a few years.
But then you could just change it. That's what I'd say. Like, I think it's not that hard to change a name. Like, sorry, as a question, I'll have to get back to that one in a second. But yeah, it's not that hard to change a name. I think sometimes it's really important to change a name. A really good example of this, the project I was working on at Shopify, was basically like taking data subject requests from customers and distributing them to our internal systems so that they could process them. And so we had like this record of the request, and we had this record of the service that was going to process them. And we had to have a record that joined those two records together. So we had like service request, it was called for a while, or like request service, it was called. And it was named like that name, by the way. For pretty generic name, but it kind of describes the two things that it's connecting. It was named like that for a few weeks, and then we realized that it should be called assignment. Like, it's an assignment of something to do that to a service for a request. And it just, when you give something like that the right name, it just becomes a lot easier to talk about and think about. Like talking about an assignment to some service, it's just really, really clear what that's doing compared with like service request, or what's that meant
service to be? Request is it's like naming a component implementation.
Dark mode or regular? That's a good question. I do not use my macOS in dark mode, and I use light mode for almost everything, with one exception. Usually, my text editor is in dark mode, but that's it. It's the only thing. I don't know why. And sometimes I set that to light mode. It's become very normal
with developers, but yeah. Just your code editors in dark mode.
Yeah, I like everything else to, even my terminal. I don't want my terminal in dark mode. I think that helps me kind of like, when I'm switching between my text editor and my terminal, it's like really visually different. My favorite text editor is Nova by Panic.
I have not tried that.
And my
favorite...
what's
so great about it?
It's just like, it's just the next best thing after Atom was discontinued. So Atom was really, in fact, I think Nova actually is better than Atom now. I was very, very sad when GitHub discontinued Atom, and VS Code is nothing on Atom. But Nova, I think, is a really, really interesting take. I like that they have, like, they've built it for Mac using Mac technologies, and they haven't tried to make like this cross-platform Electron app that's really slow. So Nova.
I liked Atom. I mean, last year I switched from Emacs to Atom. That's how nice it was. And then they immediately discontinued it.
I know, it's so annoying. It was so good. So I use Nova as my text editor, and I use a font called JetBrains Mono as the font. In that text editor. I really like it because it's got like really good readability for a monospace font, and also, or I should say typeface really. Also, it comes with really nice ligatures for things that you do in code, like a literal proc, or literal lambda would be like dash and then less than or greater than. Which one am I talking about? Dash and then greater than. And so it has like a ligature that joins those into a single character that's been specifically drawn to represent that.
Nice.
Or like exclamation mark equals, cool. Not equals.
Innovation in the fonts and stuff is so cool, right? That the fonts specifically for computer programmers or for people with poor vision, or the Google stuff about trying to make, what is it called, the font that works in every language.
Right.
Seems like an endless project, but
and as a terminal, I use a app called Warp, which is warp.dev, which is just a really nice take on a terminal. Oh, I only switched to that very recently from the basic built-in one.
So it's close to what my next question was going to be. Dennis is asking, which books can you recommend to someone learning programming?
Okay, so I was asked this question very recently, and I wrote actually a list of just a handful of books that I would start with. So if you're a complete beginner, this is basically where I would start. And I would not just do the books, but like try to find some good video courses and things as well. There's this book called Wise Poignant Guide to Ruby, which is just a really excellent introduction. Then I also recommend The Practical Object-Oriented Design by Sandy Metz. Then there's a book that I would recommend getting, which is called The Well-Grounded Rubyist, and it's basically like a really big language reference. It's the kind of thing that you should not expect yourself to remember everything from. Like, read it from cover to cover, but you don't need to remember everything. Like, you'll remember that there was something about that thing in the book, and you can look it up later, but it's a good reference. Other great books are Refactoring by Martin Fowler, which is basically like
classic for any language, right? But
just
not
amazing.
A Ruby book. That's just
it's not a Ruby book, but it's so worth reading. Like, it basically just shows you some code that is like, it works, and it's not great, and it has like this particular way that it could be improved. And there's like hundreds of ways that you can improve code that's structured in one way and make it like better, make it more easy to read and easy to understand. The Pragmatic Programmer is also a kind of classic, quite old book, kind of more on like the craft of programming as opposed to like any specific language. So it's like more like principles like leaving no broken windows, which is this concept of like, I'm trying to remember the example, but basically, like, I think the example he gives is this car that's been like sat somewhere for months and it hasn't been touched, but then the minute that one window is broken, it gets completely like smashed by, like within a few days, every single window is broken because, yeah, whatever. But how that applies to programming is like, you kind of don't want to leave any smelly code around for too long. Like, don't leave something really badly tested or like anything really bad, because it kind of sets the tone for other stuff. I don't know, it's generally just a really good book on like some kind of more abstract principles of programming. And another one, the last one on my list, was Grokking Algorithms, which sounds really kind of scary, but it's basically like it's like cartoon drawings and like sketches to try to explain how some simple algorithms work, and it's just amazing like way to get into that and try to understand how these things work.